Hello everyone, welcome back. This video is about chapter 6 from the Helicopter Flying Handbook, which is all about weight and balance. So weight and balance is always a consideration for pilots. And for helicopter pilots, it's slightly more complicated. So what's more complicated about it? Well, number one, when you talk about weight, the weight of a helicopter is a little bit more critical than an airplane. We demand a lot more from a helicopter. We try to make it take off and land vertically, get into really tight spaces, hover, do other things that airplanes just can't do. So if we have too much weight in the helicopter, it's just not going to take off. Now, the book goes through different kinds of weight. We have basic empty weight. What is it? Weigh when there's nothing in it, no people, no fuel, things like that. And then we have typically a maximum gross weight as well. Just like any aircraft, there has to be a balancing point. The center of gravity has to be within certain limits. Now, here's one of the things that's different from helicopters and airplanes is that for an airplane, normally we worry about longitudinal center of gravity. So, what is the front to back CG? Where does this airplane fall? Does it fall within a certain range? And different airplanes have different ranges for the CG fore and aft. There are some airplanes out there that, there's like a joke. You can tell the sundowner pilots because every time that they go to fly, they're doing a weight and balance because it's a very tight CG in that particular airplane. So some helicopters have a tighter CG range than others as well. Now, different from airplanes is that helicopters, we also look at the lateral CG. So is it balanced side to side? You might say, well, why do you care? Well, if you look at how a helicopter works, it's very different from an airplane. You got this spinning rotor overhead. So if you got a lot more weight on one side than the other, it can cause problems. And that's one reason why when you look at limitations on some helicopters, they will say you can only solo from this side of the helicopter. And, your pilot must weigh at least this much. Or a occupant cannot weigh more than this much because they don't want that lateral balance to be all out of whack. And the book talks about forward and aft CG issues. If you have a forward CG, what's going to happen? You're coming into a hover, and you'll notice that the nose is low. And you have to pull back a lot on the cyclic in order to control it in a no-wind hover. So, obviously, if this is something you're encountering, you probably should land again because this could lead to some big problems. You start throwing wind into the mix, for example, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I'm not sure what I'm going to do here to make this work. You might run out of control. So if the nose is hanging low, that's kind of a good sign. Aft CG, you have a light pilot, and you got a bunch of fuel. If the fuel is in the back of the helicopter, kind of like it is in a Schweitzer, then now you've got the opposite problem. So, here you've got the CG too far forward, and so the nose is low. Here it's too far aft, and the nose is high. And you could get into a situation where you can't put the nose down. You want to come in for a landing, you want to hover it, and you're going to hit the heels first on the skids. So that's not great. How do you calculate weight and balance? It's pretty much the same. Just remember that your mom is warm. That's my little memory aid for calculating the moment. So we calculate the moments by taking the weights times the arms. And of course, the arms you can find in the manual for your helicopter. It'll say, all right, the longitudinal arm for a pilot sitting in the seat is this many inches forward or aft of the datum line. And different helicopters will have different datums. Some of them will use the mast, some of them will use the tip of the helicopter, maybe the front of the skids. Some people will do something strange, like they'll say it's way out in front of the helicopter. That way all the numbers are positive. So, different manufacturers have different ways of doing that. But it's really the same calculation as what you have for an airplane. It's just going to be presented in a slightly different way. And then there's the extra lateral calculations that you have to do as well. So real quick, I just wanted to show you a spreadsheet that I made. And this is something that is really good to do for any aircraft. And this is my spreadsheet for a little Robinson R-22 helicopter. So here is a very simple spreadsheet. You can put in the empty weight of the helicopter and what its arms are, both longitudinally and laterally. And then you have the ability to put in your pilot and passenger weights. And then you can put in how much fuel you have. And I also had a little calculation here where you can say, what if I remove the doors? Saves me 10.4 pounds in the case of that helicopter. And then here's a little graph. Basically, I looked in the manual for this particular helicopter and I saw, here are the limits. This little envelope is the limit, and this is the lateral limits. And then I drew these lines. So it says, here's where we are if we're flying with the doors on and with the doors off. So we go from whatever fuel we started with to empty. And you can see that the lateral limits, I'm pretty good. The longitudinal limits, it's a little close here. I'm kind of toward the forward limit. So if I went on a flight on this actual helicopter, weighted down the way that I have in my spreadsheet, I would probably notice that the nose was hanging pretty low, but it was still just barely inside the limits. All right, so that is chapter 6, which is all about weight and balance in a helicopter.